Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Did you just hear the news? President Trump just announced that he will be declaring Antifa a terrorist organization. Thanks for allowing me to have a little fun there. Um, I wanted to react to that, but first I'll read the statement from Trump, if in case you didn't have a chance to read it yet. So this is posted on his Truth Social about 15 or 20 minutes ago. I am pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I am designating Antifa a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster as a major terrorist organization. I will also be strongly recommending that those funding Antifa be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So, if looking at my reaction, maybe you might be surprised for why am I not jumping down and celebrating? Well, this is going to be a real talk with you all, and I want to set realistic expectations, and I think you all should be aware of what the statement means and what can happen next. So, this isn't the first time that President Trump has directed his administration to treat Antifa as a terrorist organization. People forget that back in 2020, in May, actually, right when the BLM Antifa riots broke out after George Floyd died, that Donald Trump also had a proclamation. And what people have to understand is that it is first and foremost symbolic. The statement that his administration will be treating it as a terrorist organization is not like an executive order where it's a law. And when I told people that to sort of tamper down expectations, because a few days ago, a journalist had asked him at a press conference if he would be doing it, and he was suggesting he was. And I think expectations were unrealistic. So Congress can pass various resolutions. There's been proposed resolutions to declare Antifa a terrorist organization as well that happened as far back as 2019 after I was beaten. And that one didn't pass, none of them passed, but even if they did, it would be symbolic. So how come it's only symbolic? Why can't the President of the United States sign executive order and have federal law in the same way that he did on dozens of other executive orders, right? Well, first and foremost, the First Amendment and how the courts have interpreted those protections do not allow the government to ban organizations because that would be seen as a infringement of one's free speech. It's very important. Antifa is not the only violent extremist organization in the US. We have had decades of revolutionary communists who plan terrorist activities, who call for it. We have neo-Nazi groups who have been involved in violence. The US, by law, cannot ban organizations domestically. That's different than in Europe or the UK, where I'm live streaming to you from. In UK, they can. In European countries, they don't have a First Amendment, so governments can ban, and they do. For example, just a number of weeks ago, there was a group called Palestine Action that was proscribed or banned in the law. by the current UK government. Palestine Action is a radical leftist group. They commit all sorts of domestic terrorist attacks, and the one that crossed the line was an attack on military infrastructure it was close to Brighton, I think it was, or maybe Bristol. And so the government swiftly announced that they would be banning them. And immediately the social media was taken down once the law was actually passed. The people who were involved in the leadership removed that affiliation from the social media. There's been rallies in support for Palestine Action, a number of them right outside Parliament, by hundreds and thousands of people coming out to say, I support Palestine Action, I'm part of it. And hundreds of them were arrested recently. I mean, they were charged with like low offenses for stating that. But in the UK, they do have a framework of where organizations can be banned and memberships in it is banned and inviting support for it can be banned. In the US, we have no such thing. Um, you can view that as a blessing and a curse, right? It protects the US has the most speech protections in the entire world, but then that means also at the same time that violent extremists can call for violence quite openly, and the threshold for criminality in that speech is extremely high, which is why we see most of the time when people are making death threats, nothing ever happens. Going back to the US, what what can be done though? If you listen to the press conference the other day where the journalist asked Trump if he was considering this and he said yes, I thought the part that mattered more came after, and it actually didn't get very much media attention. He said, we have RICO, we can use RICO. I'll be talking to US Attorney General Pam Bondi. And Trump is not a lawyer. He's he's a head of government, head of state in the US. So when he says certain things about what he's going to do or wants to do, you also always have to consider that that's very different than what then actually happens in terms of like through law enforcement or the Department of Justice or the FBI. So what can be done is um, RICO or conspiracy um, crimes do exist at the federal level in the legislation currently. You don't have to pass new legislation. And that can be used to go after various Antifa cells and groups. And it has been done, not at the federal level, but at the state level. And you know where? A lot of people are surprised when I tell them this. In California, in 2023, there was a very big trial in San Diego County that got no media attention nationally. And it didn't even get much media attention in the state of California or or Southern California. So it was the state of California versus members of SoCal Antifa. They 12 people have been arrested and charged with felony conspiracy, and they were accused of conspiring together as this group, SoCal Antifa, to commit acts of violence against the public and Trump supporters back in 2021 at a pro-Trump rally. People were really brutally beaten. A woman, a teenage boy, the militants came masked with weapons. Anyways, it went to trial. And if you look back on my reporting, you can search on my Twitter or Google type in SoCal Antifa and you go and you'll see the reporting that I did with Ava Knott, my colleague who's based in San Diego. And she went to a trial. All the evidence came out. Who was involved in the signal chat groups? How did they coordinate? How did they get from LA and Long Beach and all these different areas down to San Diego? What was the escape route? What was the plan? Who came with what? What weapons were brought? Um, how they celebrated the violence when they thought they got away with it, all that came out. And all 12 were convicted in one way or another. And that was under the California state criminal statute of felony conspiracy, in this case, conspiracy to riot. Similar legislation exists at the federal level to go after organized crime. So something can be done. Okay, I don't want this to be a whole um, rain on the parade type of thing, but I want people's expectations to be set right. Another thing is sometimes people ask me, wait, people have been convicted for being a part of a terrorist group like Al Qaeda or Islamic State, IS. That is true. However, here's a very important difference. In the federal legislation on against being part of terrorist groups or providing material aid to terrorist groups, which are federal crimes, by the way, terrorism in terrorist groups, is how it's defined at the federal level, is international. It's foreign. None of that legislation applies to domestic terrorist groups. So, a foreign organization, you don't have to worry about First Amendment type of issues, right? They're not based in the US. This type of criminal organizing is happening overseas. But you can see that legislation is also now I would say it's outdated in that it was made post 9/11 in that type of context. In the nature of Islamic terrorism, domestic terrorism has changed a lot in the decades since that. So yeah, let me see. I don't know if any of you are asking any questions. If you can, go ahead and send it in. I'm trying to think any other angles to explore with here. I'll sort of just recap. Trump declared that he would be designating Antifa as a major terrorist organization. That's his quote on Truth Social. A lot of people saw the headlines, was very excited. I'm here to say um, that excitement has to be tampered a bit. Okay. Yeah. Domestic radical extremist organizations cannot be banned because of the First Amendment. It's why there are groups like the KKK that still exist, or neo-Nazi groups that exist. Membership to those groups is not a crime in the US, and it cannot be because of the First Amendment. Similarly, membership, nobody's challenged this, of course, in the law, but just as a matter of legal consistency, prosecutors know that they can't probe somebody's political affiliation as it and make it a criminal matter in that regard. But hope is not lost. We do have federal legislation on conspiracy and RICO crimes, which is about organized crime. And that's where we can go after people. And I hope, therefore, that this statement, which is it's symbolic, but I hope that it's really prioritized by the Department of Justice. And it's going to be really hard and novel in a way, right? Antifa has not been prosecuted at the federal level in any cases where they did engage in organized criminality in federal jurisdictions or via attacks on federal property. There's still been ongoing attacks on the ICE facility in Portland, for example, to this day, by the way, for months now. And um, there's been dozens of arrestees. I think by my count, 26 have been charged. Most of them are disproportionately they are trans or gender diverse in some way. You guys are probably not surprised to hear that. Um, but none of them have been charged with conspiracy. They're charged with like assault, um, assault with a deadly weapon, possession of an explosive device, trespass, ignoring a lawful order, those type of things, um, which us don't really get at the heart of what's going on. And um, I've spent now since 2017 focused on reporting on Antifa and learning their tactics and how it's evolved as well. Keep in mind that organized far left violent militancy, those who are in a sort of leadership role, who have influence, they're very smart in learning how to evade accountability and how to evade the law. They know it. They're experts at it. This is what they do. Their whole mantra is about doing crimes and how to get away with it. Attacking journalists, for example, is one part of that. If you assault journalists, then they don't show up to report what's happening. They don't come with cameras, right? So then you eliminate one way that evidence could be gathered, right? If somebody else was there documenting things in public. Um, I noticed that in the last maybe about 4 years, the tactics for how Antifa have organized have shifted quite a bit. I know that they were quite rattled by the charges that came in 2021 for the SoCal Antifa cell. I mean, it went to trial in 2023, or maybe it was 2024. I might have the year wrong. Anyways, it took years to get to trial, but they were charged years earlier, and that really quite rattled organized Antifa groups. So a lot of them have gone really quiet. If you look back, for example, at the social media, Rose City Antifa, they don't really post stuff anymore. They don't post things on their website. They still have an active website, and that's the Antifa group in Portland, by the way. They're doing that. They're going quiet because they want to have this perception that they're not actually organized. Um, and instead, what they do is, and this is what Islamic State did, for example, they put the propaganda and radicalizing materials online. They recruit on the ground. Um, and what they encourage their recruits to do, and those who are sympathetic to the ideology, sympathetic enough to become a militant, is to take your own direct action, either as an individual or maybe with another comrade or a very small group. And just a few weeks ago, that happened in Texas. You know, Texas of all places. People always, over the years, have looked over my reporting and say, "Oh, this could, the Portland stuff, it could never happen in this red state or that red state." That's very naive. I've said this in the context of the Charlie Kirk assassin suspect. Some of the often the most radicalized leftists who are violent are those who are converts into that ideology, i.e., they come from conservative families or conservative areas. They are more radical than those who are brought up in places like Portland or Seattle. It was in North Texas that there was a Antifa ambush attack on an ICE facility. This should have been leading all the headlines. You had an officer that was shot in the neck. He was very lucky to survive, by the way, and a whole cell that was essentially dismantled. And then there was a huge manhunt for one person who got away, Benjamin Song, and he's accused of being the ringleader. And he evaded arrest by hiding in the forest, allegedly. They found the firearms that he discarded, and then he was allegedly harbored in Dallas by some other comrades who were part of this militant cell network related to this far left militia group. And he evaded arrest for almost 2 weeks, by the way. He's finally taken to custody in Johnson County, Texas. So there's 16 of them there. They have been charged federally with attempted murder, and they're also facing state charges of attempted murder, domestic terrorism, and other type of charges. So yeah, there's we should be paying attention to that case right now, seeing how federal authorities handle it and also state authorities. So far, at the federal level, those alleged members part of that cell have not been charged with any type of RICO charges, any conspiracy. It's been strictly like attempted murder and possession of unlawful possession of a firearm. I think those type of charges. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there were any. I don't think anybody asked any questions. Uh, I'm gonna be scrolling up. Uh, Username Thomas asks, do you think federal officers at the ICE facility in Portland will now attempt to arrest Antifa members assaulting the ICE building? They have been arresting them. I just said that I don't know if that person joined late, that there's been 26 federal um, cases involving people who have been alleged to be engaged in criminality at the building or on the building in the last several months. But none of those federal charges have included RICO or conspiracy. And okay, let's see. What if they have gotten foreign funding? Okay, a username WM something. So that's a great question. Okay, that is where, if there's a foreign element in how they organize, that's where the current anti-terrorism legislation can really kick in. Because that's fitting very much into the mold of how prosecutors have traditionally understood terrorism. Funding from a foreign source or that's going either way. The way that Antifa organize in the US is actually very US context specific. They consume a lot of the propaganda material from Europe, like the French Antifa and the German Antifa. That stuff is translated into English. But in terms of cross organizing, there's not very much of that. However, with that said, there have been examples where there were an interstate, obviously, and international element to some Antifa crimes. Another case that I've been reporting on for years now has been in Atlanta, the so-called Stop Cop City movement. For 3 years, from 2021, 2022, 2023, there were dozens of attacks on the site that was under construction to become a police first responder training area. And Antifa on the violent far left is they called it Cop City. They don't want it. It was near Atlanta in a forested area. So they occupied it. They set up traps, like literally booby traps. They would nail um really long nails to long pieces of wood and hide it under foliage in areas where dogs and people could actually walk into. They came armed to the occupation, and they had like a music festival. This was, I think, in August of 2023 or 2022. And then they went to the site of the construction area and hurled fire bombs, explosives. They did like more than $1 million worth of damage on the construction equipment. They injured law enforcement, and then there were many arrests over that, and they were charged with domestic terrorism, by the way. The Attorney General in the state of Georgia has used, I think, the right charges against them. Amongst the people who were arrested there, one of them was, or actually is, he may still be, Thomas Jurgens, a staffer with SPLC, which is a leftist organization, a leftist nonprofit that does a lot of smear pieces against people that they put a target on. I think with the intention that they hope one of their comrades kills those targets. I've been on their so-called hate watch list before. So there are dozens of people who have been arrested over the Stop Cop City attacks and arson attacks and rioting. And almost all of them were from out of state, not from the state of Georgia, not local at all. Many of them, some of them came from other countries. There were, from my recollection, at least two Canadians and one person who was French. And the French person who was charged was released on bail. And I don't know the conditions of how, but he returned to France, which suggests to me that he had violated his bail conditions. So that case is ongoing. In fact, a number of weeks ago, the first one was supposed to go on trial, but then a mistrial was declared by the judge because the defense argued that the rules weren't followed because the public wasn't allowed to see the jury selection. I don't know fully why the judge didn't allow it. However, my speculation in that case was because there were so many threats on potential jurors from Antifa. They do this a lot, by the way. They make their presence known there. Sometimes they come masked even to court. And unfortunately, masking is allowed because of COVID-19 still. Like the laws haven't changed. People can come in and hide their identities that way. So they'll go in and sit and they'll intimidate jurors. I think that may have been the reason why that judge didn't allow the public to be seated in during the jury selection. And then a mistrial was declared. I don't think that was for one individual. There's dozens of them. I don't think another trial I don't think the date has approached yet for the new trial. So that's the Atlanta case. Still ongoing. Texas, ongoing. Okay. Let's see. Any other questions? I think. I'm gonna take one more and then I'll wrap up. I really appreciate you guys like joining in last minute. Um, okay. Oh, this person asked an excellent question. Uh, Knowing that Antifa have traveled to fight and train in the Rojava Autonomous Zone in Syria, then return home to train domestic Antifa, do you think this will play a part in in Trump legally being able to designate them as a terrorist organization? This is great. Most people had no idea this happened. So going back several years now, this would be pre-2020, there were quite a lot of Antifa members and radical anarchists who were quite inspired by an anarchist autonomous zone that had been set up in one area of Syria. So until recently, Syria had been in a catastrophic civil war, like complete failed state, right? You had Assad controlling some small regions on the coast and Damascus, but then otherwise the whole country was split up into factions that controlled. You had Islamic State for a long time, controlling a really large area like Aleppo and other cities, Raqqa. Then you have Rojava is an area within the like a Kurdish autonomous zone where the Kurds have maintained their own self-rule in part of Syria as well as Iraq as well. And within that, there's like a anarchist autonomous zone, you can say it. That's and their ideology is communist and also anarchist. And so there were a number of American Antifa, European Antifa Westerners who were quite inspired by that. And they wanted to go and see how they do it, like how do they function in the absence of a state and make it work? And how can that model be replicated in the US? And so that was attempted, for example, with the Chaz Autonomous Zone in Seattle. I went there underground. That was actually quite modeled off this idea of an autonomous zone. Of course, it's a fantasy. You can't do an experiment that's successful in Syria during the Civil War in the middle of an American city, but they tried and people died. Um, in this question in particular, then can a terrorism designation using the current federal legislation play in? I think it could if they can show that those individuals um, engaged in connected with actual designated terrorist groups when they were in Syria. My understanding is that none of those, I don't know where the status is of if the US considers some of those Kurdish groups as terrorist groups. I know the EU does. I think the US does, the YPG, if I might be right. So, if there's evidence, for example, that the American Antifa had trained with those with a banned foreign terrorist group, that person could then be charged with um, anti-terror legislation or charges. In terms of like, but the group itself, that might be harder to show in that the sense that the way that Antifa organize, even in the examples of where they are like a cell, that evidence is really well hidden. But there are so many concentric circles. You have like you can think of them. I'll just use the word members, like those who are know one another, meet up in person and train. Um, say we're going to attack this, we're going to show up for this, and then you have like a larger circle of people who are supporters of the ideology and come out and act as like support in some ways. Then the lines of who is a member and who's like there to support or who's engaging in what is protected First Amendment activity, it's all blurred intentionally. So it's going to be very, very difficult. So yeah, I'm not like disappointed or anything. I think that by Trump saying this statement that he recognizes that this is an issue, and I hope the administration will do handle it differently than the last administration because attorney the then Attorney General William Barr did not do anything with the directive from Trump that Antifa was a terrorist organization, and 2020 was so extremely violent. There were so many federal crimes committed, organized crime. There was no effort, for example, to infiltrate and dismantle those groups that were in Portland, and the outsiders who came in, the money that came in. Like the money, you can find out the money really easily. A lot of the money comes from their supporters and leftists who donate online, and if you can show that this money, that they knowingly knew that this money was being used for criminal direct actions, PayPal and Venmo and Cash App and GoFundMe, all those places, they can be subpoenaed by a court to turn over the identities of all who donated. That's never been pursued by any prosecutors. So there are lots of things that can be done, but there's no magic wand. That's my point to wrap up now. There's no magic wand that a president or the current U.S. government could wave and say this group's banned entirely, or this whole movement's banned. Cannot happen. First Amendment. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me. It's extremely late here. Told you I was in London. You know what time it is here? It's 2:30 in the morning. This is really very big news, and I wanted to weigh in. Thank you, everyone. My Substack is nocomment.com. Please subscribe. If you haven't already, become a paid supporter if you can. Like my journalism, I don't put behind a paywall because I think the information should get out there. How many times have you been in that position where you see some breaking news thing, you click the link, and then you can't read it because you have to log in and you've had to have a membership where you paid for? Like, I don't want to do that to people. So that means then I have to rely on the generosity of those. And you can become a paid subscriber. There's also in all my posts a button where you can do a one-time donation, a small amount, if that's what you're able to do. So thank you for your support. Um, I look forward to hearing your feedback on this news. Like, are you disappointed or was it quite obvious? Did you learn any new stuff? Let me know. Goodbye, everyone.